Hi-Fi Go asked if I wanted to review the latest Blon IEM. This time, it's the BL Max. Blon has a staunch following, a contrarian design philosophy, and ostensibly affordable product lines. Hi-Fi Go sent me the Max to review. If you're interested in buying hi-fi gear, Hi-Fi Go is one of a few online resellers that offers a plethora of audiophile options. Check out their website for some of the latest gear along with the classics. The Max is $37. Let's take a deep dive and figure out what you get. The Max uses dual dynamic drivers. Blon says these were professionally tuned to provide, quote, high-quality output with low distortion and high clarity. Blon uses nonsensical word salad to promote all of their products. The Max gets the same treatment. Here's a sampling of their smorgasbord of odd statements. The low frequency is rich and comfortable, full of strength. The human voice is naturally magnetic and full of thickness. High definition resolution and excellent reduction performance makes the sound heard more real and touching. Blon spends a lot of time emphasizing the crossover technology in the Max. They claim the crossover design will, quote, accurately divide the low, medium, and high frequency bands. Finally, Blon says that the Max has an ergonomic design. As usual, Blon provides nothing to help us figure out what the Max actually sounds like. Some people think this is cute. I think it's obtuse and frustratingly childish. The Max is a big IEM, and I mean big. I wouldn't call it an IEM as much as I would call it a mini speaker stuck inside your ear. As with Blon's previous IEMs, the Max is built of metal. You have to give credit to them. Blon does not make products out of brittle resin or off-the-shelf acoustic housings, for better or worse. The Max has a smooth finish. There are no rough edges or protrusions. This IEM is fairly heavy and weighs about 14 grams or half an ounce. The Max comes with bare minimum accessories. You get the typical Blon carrying pouch, a few silicone ear tips, and a 2-pin cable. As usual, Blon's ear tips are some of the worst I have ever used of any IEM at any price range. It is patently obvious that Blon uses the same tips for all of their IEMs. The cable is improved over the less than acceptable versions Blon ships with the BL03 and the 05. The cable that comes with the Max is covered in a plastic sheath that minimizes microphonics. This is the type of cable that Blon should have been including with its previous IEMs. It's a good option. As for comfort, well, this is subjective, of course, but in my opinion, Blon has outdone itself with the BL Max and created an IEM that is more uncomfortable than the BL03 and the 05. You have to wear this IEM in a vertical position. That's how it was designed. It stands out immediately. It looks like a hearing device from the 80s. It's huge, chunky, and because of its weight, tends to not have a secure fit, at least in my ears. The Moondrop Starfield is also a heavy IEM, but it's a bit more contoured to fit within my ear cavity. The Max, on the other hand, will always be precariously situated. The only firm point of contact will be the ear tips. You have to get a good, strong seal, or the Max will either fall out or will require constant adjustment. Unfortunately, the ear tips are thin and somewhat uncomfortable. I could wear the Max for about 2 hours before needing a break. It is a little heavy, cumbersome, and the stock ear tips are uncomfortable for long-term use. Overall, the build quality is excellent, but the design is confusingly counterintuitive. I think the cable is perfectly agreeable. However, the ear tips need improvement. I tested the Max using my Low 2 PAW 6000, EcoZerta ITM03, and Modi Liquid Spark stack. I used the stock accessories and listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. The Max is easy to drive. You don't need a dedicated amplifier. Adding more power to the IEM doesn't really make a material audible difference as long as it's getting sufficient power. Blon suggests that the Max has a strong bass response. My tests indicate it has emphasized bass response. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, there is a sub-bass rumble from the beginning. The Max was able to present this detail. It was clearly overemphasized. It was louder than what I heard on the more neutral Moondrop Quarks. The reverberation was about average, similar to what I heard on the Quarks. Separation between sub-bass and mid-bass was not particularly clear. When the crescendo hit, the organ melded heavily with the other instruments. The rolling thunder sound effect overshadowed all the other elements. When the vocals chimed in, they rose from the background until they were just about shoulder to shoulder with the instruments. In Conquered by Overwork, there's a rolling marble sound at the beginning. This is supposed to pan from right to left to center. The Max did present this detail, including the panning. There are multiple drums in this track, and the Max made all of them sound nearly the same. Drum strikes were hard and sharp. There was melding from one drum strike to the next, resulting in slightly longer reverberation on the Max compared to what I heard on the Quarks. I listened to several hip-hop songs, including Pure Water, New Patek, Reel It In, and Uproar. On each occasion, the Max emphasized the sub-bass. The subwoofer always sounded like it was just a few feet away from my head. The drums were a little louder than the subwoofer effects. Vocals were 1 to 2 steps ahead of the instruments and clear. I listened to my Sicario playlist. I use these songs to determine if there is any audible bass distortion. Traversing from low to high volumes, I was able to hear zero distortion. Overall, the Max has a significant bass emphasis. There's average at best clarity in the bass region. Blon says that the Max presents vocals magnetically. My tests indicate that the mids are forward and vocals are quite sibilant. In Laura Gartland's song Why Am I Like This, there's natural vocal grain and sibilance mixed in. The Max appeared to keep the vocal grain fairly neutral, similar to what I heard on the Quarks. However, sibilance was emphasized. It was considerably more obvious when compared to the Quarks. While the emphasis was not quite harsh to my ears, it was nowhere close to neutral. The vocals were shoulder to shoulder with the drums. Drums were always loud, however, they did not overshadow the vocals, surprisingly. There was melding between drum strikes and the guitar. In Want You Back by Haim, the Max again emphasized female vocal sibilance. It was considerably higher than what I heard on the Quarks. At 8 seconds into the song, the primary singer says the word "we," dragging it out, making it sound gravelly. The Max did present this detail clearly. There are 2 backup vocalists, one in each channel. Initially, they were perfectly clear on the Max. When the instruments played at maximum, these backup vocalist voices melded into one. The drums, piano, guitar, and bass all melded with each other. The drums were louder than these other instruments. Generally, the vocals were 1 step ahead of all instruments except for the drums. The drums were as loud as the vocals. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the Max rendered the ukulele, drums, and bass without difficulty. However, the drums were louder than the ukulele. The male vocalist's voice was shoulder to shoulder with the drums. His sibilance was not noticeably emphasized and sounded similar to what I heard on the Quarks. There's a backup vocalist in this track and his voice is layered beneath the primaries. Most headphones and IEMs cannot separate this detail. The Max could not either. Between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds, there are sharp intakes of breaths. The Max did present this detail. Overall, the mids are a bit forward, though they vie for attention with the bass. There's a considerable sibilance emphasis, at least for female vocalists. There's average at best clarity and separation of mid-centric elements. I don't know what Blon says about the treble, but my test suggests that the Max has a treble emphasis. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the Max clearly presented the brass and horns. Their nasally signatures came right through the mix. However, the higher pitched notes seemed pushed forward. They were louder by several decibels compared to the Quarks. The timpani was a bit emphasized as well, though it did not drown out the other instruments in this song. There was average separation at the group sets, meaning I could hear one set of instruments from another without difficulty. The Max does not have verticality, depth, or width. In other words, instruments do not sound above or below, or are further away in the wings, nor do they sit further back like in an orchestra arrangement. In Flight from the City, the Max made the piano sound like it was about 5 feet away. The bassy notes were emphasized, and did tend to meld with each subsequent note. I could sometimes hear the pops and sizzles and the electric buzzing effects. The cello was clear, but melded a bit with the piano. I barely heard the creaking of wood on the pianist's bench and the shifting of the cello's weight. In Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, the Max rendered the piano in the right, drums in the left, saxophone center, and the bass slightly behind. The saxophone was clear, but its higher-pitched notes were louder than what I heard on the Quarks. The cymbals are struck at different positions, which should result in slightly varied tonalities. The Max made all the cymbal strikes sound the same. The saxophone was about 1 step ahead of the drums. Overall, the Max has a treble emphasis. It starts somewhere around the mid-treble region. The deviation from neutral is not necessarily significant. For example, I never heard a harsh or piercing sound. The Max is not particularly amazing at detail retrieval, but it does a perfectly respectable job. The bass emphasis drowns out some details that should be present, but other times, when bass instruments are not the focus in a song, details appear without difficulty. Pops and sizzles, electric buzzing effects were sometimes audible. However, twangs of guitar strings, sharp intakes of brass, multiple vocalists were generally available. Creaking of wood and the shifting of a cello's weight were sometimes difficult to hear when bass instruments were involved. It just really depends on your mix. I have a quantitative test for detail retrieval. I use Kazuki's song New Light, which has layers of details. This includes the sound of wind, rustling of grass, children playing, synth, piano, and footsteps. I count the number of footsteps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The audeze MS2 presents 8 to 9 footsteps. The tin hifi T2 and the T2 Evo present 7 to 8. The Moondrop Aria presents 7 footsteps. The T2 Plus and the Blon BL05 present 6 to 7. The The Audio Legacy 2 provides 6 to 7 footsteps. The Moondrop Starfield presents 6 footsteps. The Moondrop Quarks and the Blon BL03 each present 5 to 6 footsteps. The BL Max rendered 6 footsteps. Some of these were clear, others not so much. For my detail resolution scale, I use the Moondrop Aria and Starfield as the average performers. Any IEM that provides more or less footsteps is judged accordingly. Thus, on my scale, the BL03 would be considered below average, and the T2 would be above average. The Max on my scale would fall in the average category for detail retrieval. Clarity will depend upon bass instruments in your mix. The Max, if properly fit, does not have expansive soundstage. In my experience, it seems average in this respect. The Max does not have width, depth, or verticality. Sounds never seem to come from above or below, or out into the wings, or deeper into the well. Everything is intimate, close to the ears. As with my detail test, my soundstage test also has a scale. For the sake of comparison, let's talk about soundstage of other IEMs. The tin hifi T2 and the audeze MS2 have above average soundstage. The Blon BL03 and the 05S are average at best, and perhaps slightly below average in soundstage based on proper fit. The Starfield, Aria, Quarks, and Peacock Flight are about average. After repeated tests, it seems to me that the Max has soundstage that is comparable to the Aria, Starfield, and Quarks. If you use alternative ear tips, this might change. Blon doesn't give us any helpful information about the sound signature of this product. I wish they did. It would help people understand what they're about to buy. My tests indicate that the Max has a balanced sound signature that borders on bassy. The bass is without doubt heavily emphasized. This is not a deviation from neutral in minor ways. It's patently different. Sub-bass and mid-bass get emphasis. There's average at best separation of these regions. There's no better than average clarity in the bass. There is some bass bleed into the mids despite Blon's promise that all 3 frequency ranges are perfectly separated. The mids are slightly forward. If bass is not involved in your mix, then vocals tend to stand out 2 steps ahead of instruments. If bass instruments are used, then vocals generally are about shoulder to shoulder with bass instruments such as drums. Female vocals have a noticeable sibilance emphasis, but male vocals seem close to neutral in this respect. Treble has an obvious emphasis, probably close to the mid-treble area. There's average at best clarity and separation in this region. I never heard treble instruments becoming harsh or piercing. The Max has average detail retrieval and soundstage. Clarity will depend on how the bass is mixed into your tracks. I think the Max is not really a strong V-shaped signature. Bass and mids appear to be similarly emphasized, with treble less so. Maybe this could be considered a W-shaped sound. In other words, in my opinion, the Max has a balanced sound signature that leans towards bassy. If you look at some of the FR graphs for this product, you might get the impression that the signature is U-shaped or that the mids are recessed, but that was not my experience. Whether this sound signature will be to your liking is something you will have to decide. When deciding what to buy, you should compare products. That's what we try to do here. We will compare the Blon BL Max to the Blon BL03 and the Moondrop Aria. I used the stock accessories for each product. I plugged each IEM into a passive AB switch. That switch was plugged into my RME ADI2 DAC. I listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. I tried to volume match. The BL03 and the Max both have emphasized bass. However, the Max has greater sub-bass accentuation. There is slightly more separation of sub-bass from mid-bass on the 03. Transients is a little bit faster on the 03. Clarity in the bass region is a bit more obvious on the 03. Mid-bass impact is noticeably harder on the max. The mids are similar, though not the same. Both the 03 and the max have a sibilance emphasis. It sounds nearly identical. However, vocals are a bit closer to the ears on the max. The 03 tends to show more vocal grain. The 03 has marginally greater clarity in the mids. The treble is similar between the 03 and the max. Both have an emphasis. Both appear to push higher pitch notes of brass and horns to a similar degree. However, all treble instruments seemed closer to the ears on the max. There's a little bit more clarity in the treble region on the max. The 03 and the max have similar soundstage, but I think the max usually sounded wider. The max is overall marginally more detailed and clearer. The aria has less sub-bass emphasis than the max. It's a fairly obvious difference. The aria has faster transients and more clarity in the bass region. Separation of sub-bass from mid-bass is more noticeable on the aria. Mid-bass impact is harder on the max. The mids are different as well. Both IEMs emphasize vocal sibilance. However, the aria seemed to push vocal grain marginally more than the max. Drums typically sounded louder than vocals on the aria. The max, on the other hand, was able to keep vocals at least shoulder to shoulder with the drums. The max places vocals closer to the ears. The treble is also different between these IEMs. The aria has an emphasis in the mid-treble area, followed by a roll-off in the upper treble. The max, on the other hand, starts its treble accentuation in the mid-treble and keeps going on from there. The placement of treble instruments and clarity is similar between these IEMs. The max and aria have similar detail, clarity, and soundstage. Comparisons like these help us put newer products into perspective. Here, it is clear that the max retains Blon's house sound, but Blon took the BL-03's already emphasized bass and turned it up a notch. Compared to the aria, the max is a pretty obvious difference. The aria has closer to neutral bass in comparison, but also has recessed mids. None of these IEMs sound identical. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, which depend on your particular viewpoint. Those who want a lot of bass but also vocal clarity might like the max. If you want a bassy IEM with vocals a bit further away than what you hear on the max, then the BL-03 might be your cup of tea. Those who prefer a more U-shaped signature with a gentler upper treble might prefer the aria. As always, you might hate all of these IEMs, or you may fall in love with any of them. Blon has a strident following. Some of its fans claim that Blon makes the best value IEMs because their products have the best sound for the least amount of money. That's an entirely subjective opinion. It's not objectively true, and there are few reasons to be skeptical of Blon's hype. The BL-03 and the 05 suffer from the same failures. Both IEMs require fiddling to fit, and are somewhat cumbersome to use. Both IEMs come with bottom barrel accessories. The cable and ear tips included with those products are some of the worst I have seen. Blon refuses to give us meaningful descriptions of the sound signatures of those two products. Instead, they rely on tongue-in-cheek marketing that is more frustrating than cute. When you factor in the questionable fit of the BL-03 and the 05, along with the need to buy replacement cables and ear tips, these two products become less certain hits and more questionable purchases. By the time you buy replacement accessories for the 03 and the 05, you could spend up to double the price of these IEMs. The BL Max is a continuation of some of the previous failures. The Max's comfort and fit is going to be a significant issue for some people. Its big, girthy, monolithic design is not one of a true IEM. The Max's ear tips are the same inexcusable trash that is included with the other Blon products. On the other hand, the Max, just like its older siblings, has good construction. It is sturdy. The cable which comes with the Max is perfectly agreeable. The Max has a sound signature that is similar to that of the BL-03. It is a continuation of their house sound with some modifications. The Max has a balanced W-shaped sound signature. The bass is significantly boosted. The mids are slightly forward and sibilant. The treble has a noticeable accentuation. Does this make a strong value proposition? Arguably, yes. For under $40, the Max does rectify some of the issues I pointed out about the BL-03 and the 05. The cost for cable replacement is not necessary. And while you might still have to pay for ear tips, you can find better alternatives than what Blon gives you for under $10. The Max is built well. It is cumbersome for me, but it might fit other people just fine. The Max has a sound signature that you may or may not like. Those who want a more neutral presentation will be deeply disappointed with this product. Those who want more clarity and detail probably will not be satisfied. But if you're looking for a bassy IEM that still produces clear vocals and you don't think you will mind the looks, then the Max is a good option among all the other options in the market. If you like the other Blon IEMs, then the Max might appeal to you as well.